What if the enemies America fears the most were never born on their own, but carefully shaped in secret rooms thousands of miles away? What if the very agency meant to protect the nation actually laid the foundation for the wars and threats we face today? For decades, the CIA has operated in shadows, pulling strings that changed the course of world history. And while most of these moves were meant to defend American power, many of them backfired, creating enemies that would one day strike back. This is not a story about conspiracy theories. This is a story backed by history, by declassified files, and by the undeniable pattern of events. From the deserts of the Middle East to the jungles of Latin America, the CIA has left fingerprints on conflicts that still burn today. And here's the shocking truth: the line between ally and enemy is often one decision away. And those decisions were made in secret, far from the public eye. Stay with me until the end of this video. Because once you see the full picture, you'll never look at modern conflicts the same way again. You'll understand how yesterday's secret deals became today's wars, and why new enemies might already be in the making. The Central Intelligence Agency, or CIA, was born in the aftermath of World War II. America had just emerged as a global superpower, but there was a new threat on the horizon: the Soviet Union. The Cold War wasn't fought with open battles. It was fought with spies, secrets, and silent wars carried out behind closed doors. The CIA was created in 1947 with one mission: to protect American interests by gathering intelligence and, when necessary, taking action in the shadows. But here's where things took a darker turn. Protecting America didn't always mean defending its borders. It often meant interfering in other countries, toppling leaders, funding rebels, and shaping governments that served U.S. interests. To Washington, this was strategy. To the people who lived under those changes, it felt like betrayal and domination. And betrayal has a way of planting seeds of hatred that grow over generations. At the heart of it all was a single idea: better to control the game than to watch it unfold. Yet by playing this game, the CIA wasn't just removing threats, it was also creating them. Enemies were born not only out of ideology but out of resentment of America's secret hand moving their destiny. In the early years of the Cold War, the CIA began experimenting with its new power, testing how far it could go to shape the world. Two moments stand out: Iran in 1953 and Guatemala in 1954. These were not battlefields with soldiers clashing openly. They were secret operations, designed to look invisible. But their impact would echo for decades. In Iran, the CIA helped overthrow Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh after he dared to nationalize the country's oil industry. To Americans, this was about protecting Western access to energy. To Iranians, it was about robbing their independence. The CIA installed a ruler more favorable to the US, the Shah. For a while, America gained influence and control. But in the long run, resentment grew. Decades later, that anger fueled the Islamic Revolution of 1979. When the US embassy was stormed, and Iran turned from ally to sworn enemy. 1 year after Iran, the CIA tried the same playbook in Guatemala. The government there was pushing land reforms that threatened powerful US business interests. The CIA stepped in, organized a coup, and replaced the elected leader with one who would fall in line. To Washington, it was another victory. But to Guatemalans, it was the start of a brutal cycle of dictatorships, violence, and anti-American feelings that lasted generations. These early experiments showed a clear pattern: short-term gains for the US, long-term enemies for the future. Each secret operation left behind anger, betrayal, and broken trust. The kind of emotions that never fade away, and the kind that often transform into rebellion. By the 1980s, the Cold War had reached one of its most dangerous points. The Soviet Union had invaded Afghanistan, and the CIA saw an opportunity. If America could bleed the Soviets in Afghanistan, it might tilt the balance of the Cold War. So the CIA launched one of its biggest covert programs ever, funneling billions of dollars in weapons, training, and support to Afghan fighters, known as the Mujahideen. At the time, this looked like a masterstroke. The Mujahideen fought fiercely, using CIA-supplied rockets and rifles against Soviet troops. Eventually, the Soviets withdrew, and Washington celebrated a victory. But hidden inside that victory was a seed of disaster. Many of the fighters who were armed and trained in those years went on to form the backbone of extremist groups. Among the networks that grew in that chaos was al-Qaeda, led by none other than Osama bin Laden. The irony is chilling. In its rush to defeat one enemy, the CIA helped create another, one far more dangerous. The Taliban, too, rose from the same soil, fueled by the weapons and training left behind. What began as a Cold War chess move spiraled into decades of conflict, terrorism, and the September 11th attacks that changed the world forever. This was the perfect example of blowback, when covert operations return years later, not as victories, but as haunting consequences. The US had won the battle against the Soviets, but it had unknowingly set the stage for its own nightmare. In the Middle East, another story unfolded that showed the same dangerous pattern. During the 1960s and 70s, the CIA kept a close eye on Iraq, a country rich in oil and strategically placed. Among the rising figures in Iraqi politics was a young man named Saddam Hussein. At first, Saddam was not seen as an enemy but as a useful partner. His strong stance against communism and his willingness to keep Iraq aligned with Western interests made him valuable. Reports suggest the CIA even supported him during his early rise to power. For Washington, this was a win, an ambitious leader who could keep Iraq stable and prevent Soviet influence in the region. But alliances built on convenience rarely last. By the 1980s, the US even backed Saddam in his brutal war against Iran, providing intelligence and support despite his record of violence. Once again, it was about short-term strategy, not long-term consequences. The relationship soon collapsed. Saddam grew too powerful and too independent. His invasion of Kuwait in 1990 shocked the world and triggered the Gulf War. Suddenly, the man who had once been considered an asset was painted as a brutal dictator and a global threat. Over time, Saddam Hussein transformed into one of America's greatest enemies, leading to the 2003 invasion of Iraq and a war that reshaped the entire Middle East. The story of Saddam shows the same haunting lesson. By empowering leaders for short-term goals, the CIA often planted the seeds of future conflicts. The ally of yesterday became the enemy of today. And the cost of that shift was paid not only in politics but in countless lives. This pattern has a name, and it became one of the most important words in the history of US foreign policy: blowback. It means the unintended consequences of secret actions, when the enemies America faces are the very ones it helped create. And blowback became the recurring cycle of the CIA's shadow wars. In Latin America, the CIA armed and trained paramilitary groups to suppress communism. Decades later, those same groups fueled chaos, civil wars, and deep resentment toward the United States. In the Middle East, the CIA's coups and covert deals left behind bitterness that extremists turned into weapons of ideology. And in Afghanistan, the short-term victory against the Soviets produced a generation of fighters who redirected their fury at America itself. The cycle worked like this: intervene, gain control, declare success, then years later, watch that success collapse into hostility. Each time, the United States thought it was eliminating threats. Instead, it was often building new ones. The people who once took weapons, money, or training from the CIA would later see America as the very power they needed to resist. Blowback is more than just history, it's a warning. These choices don't vanish when the operation ends. They linger. They grow. And when they return, they strike with a force nobody can deny. What began as secret strategy in hidden rooms eventually spilled onto the world stage, shaping decades of violence and mistrust. Today, the consequences of those secret operations are still unfolding. Terrorist groups, civil wars, and global distrust toward America can all be traced back to choices made in the shadows decades ago. The fighters once called freedom warriors in Afghanistan became the backbone of al-Qaeda and the Taliban. The dictators once propped up for stability later turned into brutal enemies. And the resentment from coups in places like Iran and Guatemala still fuels anti-American feelings. Modern terrorism didn't appear out of nowhere. It grew from the anger, betrayal, and chaos left behind by Cold War strategies. Every drone strike, every attack, every act of retaliation today is part of that long chain of blowback. The CIA may have ended the Soviet threat, but it left behind something even more unpredictable: movements driven not just by politics, but by rage and ideology. And the question we have to ask now is chilling. Are new enemies already being created? America continues to operate overseas, supporting groups, governments, and covert missions. History shows that today's ally can easily become tomorrow's nightmare. What's happening in the present might look like strategy. But in a few decades, we may see it for what it truly is, another cycle of blowback waiting to explode. The story doesn't just belong to the past. It's still being written, right now, in real time. The story of the CIA is not just about secret missions or spy games. It's about how choices made in silence can shape the destiny of nations. Time and again, the agency set out to protect America. But in doing so, it often built the very threats the country would later fight. From Iran to Guatemala, from Afghanistan to Iraq, the pattern is clear. Today's ally can become tomorrow's enemy. And short-term victories can turn into decades of war. The lesson is simple but heavy. Power used in the shadows leaves scars that do not heal easily. Enemies are not always born out of ideology. They are often created by betrayal, interference, and resentment. And when history is ignored, the cycle repeats itself. So the next time you hear about a conflict involving America, ask yourself, is this really a new enemy? Or is it another ghost from the past, born in a CIA operation years ago? If you found this story eye-opening, make sure to share it, leave your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more hidden history investigations. Because the more we understand the past, the better chance we have at breaking the cycle in the future.